Okay, it's 3 minutes after 11, so I'm going to get us started. Let's see, how many people do we have here? We've got 15 people on the call, which is a pretty nice turnout. I'm going to ask the teachers and students on the call to introduce themselves. We also have several volunteers, but those of you who are out there who fall into that category, could you, and so let's, Andrew, could you unmute yourself and introduce yourself and your students?
Yeah, sure. So this is Andrew MacArthur. Behind me, I have some of my outdoor adventure students. None of the students in front of me right now are directly involved in the trout survey, but we've got a small crew of BBA students working on that trout survey, trying to identify reds with Jacob's help. And from what I gather, it's going fairly well. And we're just excited to learn a bit more about the red survey process and identifying reds. We watched a few videos yesterday, and looking forward to the lecture, Jacob.
Okay, Emily?
Hi, I'm here with a group of 9 students. We're excited to see what we can see because we can't go outside to our own brook. So we're happy to be here.
And tell us your school, Emily.
We're in Bennington at Mount Anthony Union Middle School.
Terrific. Now there's someone with a face mask on who hasn't identified himself with a screen name. Who would that be?
Joe, are you talking to me?
I'm talking to you.
Okay, I thought I typed in, this is Eric Anderson from the Chelsea.
See it now.
Can you see it? All right, well, we're here with our 7th grade, my 7th grade math students who were, last year, 6th graders. They took part in raising trout until we were sent home, and we're looking forward to raising them again. So we wanted to join in and put off doing our math work for a little while.
How about Hunter Cole? Could you introduce yourself?
I'm a student in Mr. MacArthur's class, and I'm interested to see what reds look like and how I can find them.
Nice. Welcome. Kevin Morris. Well, I'll move on to Benjamin Ario.
I'm in Mr. MacArthur's class.
Nice. Thank you. Kate Daly.
Hi.
Hi. Are you also in Mr. MacArthur's class?
No, I'm at Burton.
Okay. Thank you. Connor?
And you're also in Mr. MacArthur's class.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Trying to deny that association. Okay. Connor, how about you?
I'm one of Mr. MacArthur's students at Burton.
Super. Warren Webster?
I'm one of Mr. MacArthur's students at Burton too.
All right. He's swelling the ranks here. Kevin Morris, are you back?
He's also with me. I don't know where he's at right now.
I think he's working on his math.
Yeah, he might be.
Finally, I'd like Kara Granke to introduce herself. Well, I'll introduce Tara. Tara is the national coordinator of the Trout in the Classroom program for TU. So I'm going to get us rolling here. And as I said, I suggest you use speaker view so that you can get the biggest image of Jacob. I just want to give people a sense of where Jacob and Suzanne are. They are, excuse me, in the Batten Kill River. Where is the Batten Kill? Many of you know. It's in Bennington County, the blue section on the map here. And this is the course of the river. It starts up here in Dorset on Route 30, and there's a eastern branch that starts in East Dorset, and ultimately it flows through the towns of Manchester, Arlington, Sunderland, crosses into New York State, and flows into the Hudson River. And if you notice, excuse me, that's almost exactly where our team is today. Jacob, first of all, tell us who you are and explain why you're out here in the water on a cold November day.
Yes, so I'm Jacob Fetterman. I work for Trout Unlimited as the project coordinator of the Batten Kill Home Rivers Initiative. And I'm out here freezing today to show everyone some trout spawning in the Batten Kill River. And I think you might have tried to show on the map where we are, but I didn't see it. We're actually just upstream of Union Street Bridge outside of Manchester, right down the hill from the Equinox Hotel, for anyone that might be familiar.
Great, thank you. So what's a red?
So a red is actually the spawning bed of trout. And the ones that we're going to show you in a bit are most likely from brown trout. So this time of year in the fall, both brook trout and brown trout will be spawning. And in the spring, if there were rainbow trout in the watershed, that's when they would spawn. So a red, though, is actually excavated by trout. So a female will kind of make a depression in nice, good gravel that then her and a male will actually spawn over top of. So a female will release eggs, the male will put milt, which is the male reproductive juices. So they'll spawn, so the eggs will be fertilized, and then the female will actually go a little bit further upstream and she'll kind of excavate somewhat of another bed, but it's really just dusting more clean gravel down over top of where the eggs were laid in the stream. So that process makes what we call a red.
Terrific. And you talk about gravel. Could you give us an idea of what the ideal size of gravel is?
Yeah.
He's asking, you should be repeated for, he's asking about the size of the gravel. What's the ideal size?
Sorry, yeah. So the ideal size of gravel, it's not going to be sand. So to give measurements, it's probably about 1 inch to 3 inches is ideal. Something in that range. When we actually show you, I can pick some rocks up that are adjacent to the reds and give you an idea of the size substrate that they prefer. But another thing to point out with that is
Jacob, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. Suzanne, we just lost your video.
Oh.
Okay.
That might be a battery issue.
You're back.
It's back.
Okay.
We're back.
All right. Sorry about that.
So let's get out there, Jacob. Why don't you show us some reds?
Yes. So we're actually right next to them. So Suzanne's going to flip the screen and we'll go. So there's two right next to each other here. And they've actually been here at least 10 days that we know of. So the first one is right here. Is everyone able to see it?
Are you picking up the color variation? Can you see here, the lighter?
Yep.
Would
Okay.
Jacob be able to put his lens, his polarized lens in front of the camera for a
Yeah,
moment?
yeah, we'll try that out. Okay. getting a glare. Hold on. Getting like a glare. You can see it there though. You see it?
Yep. And actually, even without
And I'll
the
walk-
polarized lens, it's
What's that?
it's moderately
And if
visible,
I
I
walk
think.
around the other side of it, you might get a better look. But let's let Jacob. I don't know. Do you want to show them the rock?
Yeah, I could pick some up here. So there's a pretty good variety, but this is probably on the bigger end of what's in there. Some larger stuff, but a lot of it's finer than this. And they can't spawn in really fine gravel like sand because then it actually kind of chokes the eggs out. So they need good oxygenation in order to incubate and then hatch with high success rates in the spring.
So we're going to be seeing another view of this red, are we?
Yeah, we're trying to walk around the other side because I think the lighting. Can you see it there?
Oh yeah, excellent. Yep.
So that's probably about 4 to 5 feet, would you say?
Yeah, in length it's probably about 4 feet, and then width is probably about 2.5 or 3 feet down towards the bottom here, and up towards the top, only about 1.5 feet.
So obviously you're being very careful not to step in it because that would be tragic, right?
Yeah.
What was that question?
We're being careful not to step on it because the eggs are. And then if you can see, and we'll walk you down there in a second, but this is the first one, and then there's a second one down there that we'll walk you down to in a second.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question for you, Jacob. You believe these are brown trout reds. How could you tell the difference between a brown trout red and a brook trout red?
That's a good question.
What's the difference between a brown trout red and a brook trout red?
So the difference typically is that brown trout will produce a larger red, and they're more often in these riffly areas. Brook trout will prefer areas where the water's not flowing as fast, so they'll be sometimes more associated with pools, and they'll often be a little bit more circular, which is also attributed to the amount of flow going over them. But brown trout really do prefer the faster water associated with riffles or the tail out of pools. So you could actually notice, maybe Suzanne can show you upstream, that the water is coming into this riffle slower and it's deeper up there. So then this is really the start of the riffle where they've spawned. And so the water gets a little bit faster, shallower, and that again helps with the incubation of the eggs and keeps them safe and secure in the clean gravel that they were laid in.
Great. So is this you're going to show us the second red now?
Yeah, we're gonna walk right over here.
Beautiful.
Able to see it well?
Yes.
Yep. So this one, probably about the same length and a little bit wider towards the top end of it and not as wide towards the base. But definitely where they've spawned and really neat because you can look at this and it's like very obvious that that's where they've spawned. And so when people are going out looking for reds, the thing that I have been telling you is when you see one, you'll know because the contrast in the substrate is just so drastic that it's like, there it is.
Fantastic. I'm going to now invite people on the call, starting with the students and the teachers, to ask some questions of Jacob. And you can unmute yourself when you're ready to do that.
We're unmuted if you want to.
Yeah, just go for it.
Okay. Thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
If you can.
Okay, so my question was, what about trout specifically makes them an important part of the ecosystem?
So can you repeat that last part? What about,
What about trout makes them an important part of the ecosystem?
Okay.
What's specifically about trout?
That's a very good question. So what makes trout important? So as far as the food pyramid goes, they're important to species that would be above them, such as predatory birds like eagles you'll see along the Batten Kill. So trout support animals like that. And they're also an indicator of the overall health because you won't find trout in a stream if it's impaired by something such as either really warm water, acidity in the system. So there's a lot of factors that play into what supports a healthy trout population. And so that in itself tells you what the ecosystem is like in general. So the role that they play is kind of an indicator species of when the ecosystem might be headed in the wrong direction.
Thank you. Who's got another question?
We have another question. Just give us 1 second.
Okay.
Here we go.
When did all the trout start to decrease in number?
Say that slower.
When did all the trout start to decrease in number?
Why
Did
did
you hear
the
that?
trout start to decrease in numbers?
Yeah.
And
When and why? I guess.
When and why?
When and why?
When and why? Okay. I couldn't give you an exact day or year, but sometime around when humans started to develop land, that would have been really the start of when natural trout populations would have started to be impacted. And then in response to that, we started to try to mediate it by stocking trout. So the stocked trout is not really a foolproof fix. It's kind of temporary. So putting trout into a stream isn't going to solve the real problem. So in order to actually solve the problem, you need to address the issues, which could be things like the pollution, the sedimentation into streams. So those factors that have occurred due to human land development are really what have led to declines in trout populations. And then also a warming climate is another factor that continues to threaten populations. They're being more confined to headwater streams where temperatures are still suitable for them to persist year round.
Jacob, could you say a few words about the Home River Initiative?
Yes, so Joe asked about the Batten Kill Home Rivers Initiative. We launched it in January of this year, and it's a multi-year project to restore the Batten Kill itself and all of its tributaries. And so this project that we're doing right now of identifying reds throughout the watershed is really important to what we're doing because it will help us prioritize different areas throughout the watershed that are currently important to trout and others that we see suitable habitat but possibly no spawning, which could tell us that a potential project in that area may be able to enhance that habitat to a state that it would actually support trout and improve the overall habitat for them throughout the year.
And what are the kinds of activities and interventions that would improve habitat?
Yes, so that's a good question about what kinds of activities and interventions we could do to improve trout habitat. The addition of large wood is frequently used because wood provides a lot of that necessary overhead cover for trout. So they're less susceptible to be preyed upon by things I said earlier, like predatory birds. So ducks, eagles, hawks, osprey. And so that in itself provides good cover. And it's also usually attributed with deeper water. So making sure that the channel is stable it has access to a floodplain. Also, making sure floodplains are well vegetated is important. So trying to restore what is naturally seen in a watershed without human impacts is then good for the trout.
How about some other student questions?
We have a question.
Great.
I'm Betsy from Maple Street School, and I was wondering, why are the reds lighter in color than the rest of the rocks and other parts of the river?
Thank you, Betsy.
That's a good question. So why are reds lighter in color? So I said that how they actually excavate the red is by the female will actually take her tail and disturb the rocks. So when a stream is stagnant, or it's not really stagnant, but it's consistently flowing, rocks actually build up an algae film on top of them. And so then when a female does that and disrupts the rocks as they were laying, it overturns some, cleans them off. So it gives them a cleaner appearance, which is usually lighter in color than the rocks covered in algae around them.
Great. Other student questions?
I have a question. This is Andrew MacArthur, not a student, but I'm curious about trout's ability to reproduce in ponds and lakes. Are there certain, I know this isn't a Batten Kill watershed question necessarily, but are there any important factors that make that possible? Because I know that there is some reproduction going on.
Yeah, that's a good question, Andrew. So for the TV broadcast, repeating the question, what are important factors in lakes and ponds that are good for trout spawning? And so brook trout specifically could tune into spring seeps in a lake or pond. And so kind of similar idea is that a spring seep coming up through may clean off that gravel bottom. And so brook trout will tune into those areas and spawn. Also, usually colder water, that flow, important again to oxygenation. And if it's connected to tributaries from that pond or lake, trout, salmon that are landlocked, all these different fish will actually migrate up into these tributaries and spawn as well.
I've got a question for you, Andrew. Does the weather conditions affect when the trout spawn?
Yes, that's a great question, Joe. And I wanted to mention that earlier. So what weather conditions make it beneficial to trout spawning? And so trout and other fish are really in tune to the environment around them. So things like the photo period and temperature of the water will kind of give them a natural cue as to the right timing to spawn. So when I say photo period, that is actually the length of the day. So as we approach winter right now through the fall, the length of day that is actually light outside keeps getting shorter and shorter. So as the length of the day gets shorter, temperatures go down, something internally in a fish tells them, okay, it's time for me to spawn. Another factor is the water flows. So through the summer, flows typically go down, down, down. And then in the fall, water starts to come back up. And especially in the Batten Kill, we've noticed that just this year with how low the flows got, some tributaries actually became disconnected from the Batten Kill. And now as water levels are coming back up, fish can make it back up into those tributaries and spawn in those areas that either they have historically or possibly that they were even started as an egg themselves.
So we have a question from the 7th graders in Chelsea. What are the biggest threats to trout in 2020?
What are the biggest threats to trout in 2020? I would say this is a tough question to answer, but the biggest threat to them, at least here in the Batten Kill, I see as the rising temperatures and sedimentation. So I didn't pick one there, but temperatures are definitely putting more and more stress on them. And as I mentioned, streams drying up through the summer is going to put a lot more strain on them. And then the sedimentation issues are kind of twofold because it diminishes the available habitat, and then also for spawning also degrades the quality of the spawning habitat.
So what produces the sedimentation problem, Jacob?
Okay, another good point. So what causes sedimentation? It could be places where banks are eroding, and banks are especially vulnerable to erosion when the riparian vegetation is lost. So as trees along the river are cut down, you actually lose the benefits of their root systems that actually hold all of that soil on the bank together. So that's one cause of sedimentation. Other causes could be something like an undersized road crossing could increase sedimentation around it. There's a few different things that cause sedimentation, but they all end up having the same detrimental effect.
Emily at Mount Anthony Middle School wants to know if anyone has looked for reds in the Walloon Sack. I'll expand that and say, have any of the students or teachers on the call found any reds in any of our local streams? Well, I found one in the pond at Orvis, so that's my contribution.
But aren't they rainbows in there? Aren't there rainbows in the pond at Orvis?
They're mostly browns and brooks, I believe.
Oh, okay.
I don't think they have any rainbows in there. So we have another teacher joining us. What happens to the eggs over the winter, Jacob?
Okay, so they'll actually incubate in place where they've laid. So the actual the egg will become an embryo once it's fertilized, and then over the winter they're developing and really just waiting until the right time in the spring when they've had enough days at a certain water temperature, and then they'll start to hatch.
So they just remain in among the gravel. Now, some years we have a lot of ice in the rivers, including bottom ice. Can they survive that?
Yes, so the question's if the embryos could survive anchor ice through the winter. And that is actually something we were going to pay attention to this year, especially with lower waters. We're afraid that we may experience a higher amount of anchor ice throughout the watershed than maybe we see in a typical year, which could definitely have detrimental effects to the egg survival and hatch rates. So yes, it could definitely impact the survival of eggs.
And how about spring runoff? How consequential, how much of a difference does that make?
Spring runoff, consequential as a bad thing to high flows?
Some springs we have really high flows and very, very turbulent water. We've got boulders bouncing down the stream bed. It sounds risky to me, but you tell me, can they make it through that?
Yeah, and even a late snow. Last year we had a late snow, and I know we were worried about it with release date because of flow rate for the little alevin, like how it impacts them.
Yeah, so that's a good question too. So high flows in the spring will definitely put more strain on young fish. They just hopefully will find some of those eddies or areas of slow water. Sometimes it'll be maybe off channel kind of flood flow channel that they might get into and find refuge there. But in general, yes, it's going to put a lot more strain on the eggs as they're hatching and becoming fry.
And overall, what do we consider the survival rate to adulthood to be?
Overall, what?
Survival rate to adulthood.
Okay, it's very low. So trout have a type 1 survivorship. So they lay a whole bunch of eggs, and then so it could be 1,000 eggs, say. And then by the time they reach adulthood, it's probably like 10 out of those 1,000 eggs are going to actually become adults.
1%. Now, Clark wants to know what's similar and different between the trout eggs in the stream and the aquariums in the Trout in the Classroom program. Similar and different.
Similarities and differences between the natural habitat in the stream and the habitat in our aquarium tanks in Trout in the Classroom.
Okay. I guess I can't answer
Have
that.
you, yeah, have
as
you
well.
seen one of our tanks?
I have
Oh
not.
yeah, Jacob hasn't seen a tank yet.
Well, Suzanne, we're going to let you answer that question.
Yeah, so we start the eggs in early January. They come from the hatchery, and we have them in a breeder basket that's suspended on the side of the tank. And we all have aerators and pumps, and about 2/3 of the bottom of the tank is covered in gravel. Our chiller temperature at egg arrival, I can't remember. I know it's 55 around.
I think it was 44 last year.
44. So they're in a nice little safe breeder basket. They're not in the bottom of the river, suspended to gravel. Temperature is probably similar.
Yeah, right now, I believe the temperature in the Batten Kill is about 40 degrees.
Yeah.
41.2 according to the mayfly sensor.
Okay.
And then I think in the program we're trying to mirror the gradual increase in temperature, right, Joe?
Yeah.
So we adjust our chillers gradually, getting closer to swim up date.
I would add one of the big differences.
We're feeding
is that,
them, which always makes me nervous. Go ahead, Joe.
Well, you're standing in flowing water, so
yeah.
There's clean water coming to the eggs and well aerated water coming to them constantly, and we've got the problem of the closed system of the tank, where the chemicals can build up and fungus can get established and all sorts of bad things can happen.
And then also, how about predators for these eggs? Like, are there other fish that would eat the eggs, or
it's not really a huge problem.
Okay.
In a river, no. So things could prey on eggs, but usually you don't think of trout eggs as being a food source for many other organisms. But you could imagine that there's possibly macroinvertebrates that could get into red and enjoy some good calamari.
So at this point, we are almost out of time, but I just want to throw open the questions again to anybody, students, teachers, faculty, and volunteers on the call. Just jump in if you have something you'd like to say or ask.
I have a question, Jacob. So you identified these two reds 10 days ago. Had you surveyed this area of the Batten Kill prior to 10 days ago? Did they appear overnight, or?
So that was the first day that I had been here to survey. We actually did this in-person red survey training. So when we got here, it was like awesome because we actually could show people what reds look like. So no, I'm not sure. It could have been right before we came that night, but unfortunately we don't know for sure. And so when we're doing these spawning surveys, we've been trying to revisit sites periodically, like once a week or once every other week. And that does help us kind of pinpoint that timing. But for this one, unfortunately, we don't have that. I have walked farther upstream. I did that 10 days ago and then again today. And these are still the only two in the reach that I've walked. So I thought that it was possible that in the past 10 days, we may have seen another red, but unfortunately, I was unlucky.
And then one of the other questions I had is in one of the videos that Joe shared for the trout spawning that was on the website, there was a female building the red, laying the eggs, and then it seemed like there were two males kind of arguing, fighting with each other. Is that common? Or they?
Yes.
Yeah.
So actually, someone that frequents the Batten Kill looking for reds last winter had a video of kind of that same thing, that actually the male that was with the female noticed the smaller male trying to come up, and he chased them off and then came back in. So yeah, there's definitely that you'll have males kind of competing for a female or trying to kind of sneak in and mix in their genetics.
And then how about, I've got one more and then the temperature of the stream. So now that they've spawned, do you think she's gone downstream now? Is she going for warmer water, or?
That could be, yeah. Wherever she may have came from, they'll often kind of return to those areas or where they'd like to overwinter. So yes, yeah.
If anyone's really interested in that question of trout travel and migration, let me know, because there's been some pretty good studies done using telemetry, implanting little probes in the fish and tracking where those fish move. And what I remember, the conclusion of that study was that some of them move a lot, many miles, and some of them hardly move at all. So there's no general pattern that seems to characterize their movements in a river. But again, I do believe I have access to that study, and I could send it to you if you're interested. So I want to thank Jacob very much, and Suzanne. Absolutely couldn't have done this without you. Suzanne teaches at the Maple Street School, which is probably only about 200 yards upstream from where Jacob and Suzanne are standing. And they have the wonderful resource of having the river right literally on the edge of their campus, so they can study it to their heart's content. And I want to thank Tara Granke for joining us, even though she texted me to say that she had some background noise, so she didn't want to turn her microphone on, but I'm glad you were with us, Tara. And of course, all of the teachers who brought their students out today and the volunteers. We will be doing this again on Thursday up north on the Dog River near Northfield, and a different cast of characters. Clark Amadon, who's on this call, will be participating in that. And if you have the time, join us then as well. It'll be somewhat different, more technology employed, because we'll be using a serious professional videographer to help us out. But these will be recorded, and I'll put them on the TIC website. And there will also be broadcast. This particular one will be broadcast on GNAT and will be converted into a YouTube video that I will put online. And the one up north will also be edited after the fact and turned into a fairly slick product that I'll make available to you as well. Are there any last questions? Comments? In that case, I'm going to say goodbye and end the meeting, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
This was wonderful. Thank you, Joe.